I still remember the moment my life split in two. 1 second, I was standing in the living room, my chest full of hope, imagining the future nursery walls painted soft yellow, tiny socks in a drawer, the sound of laughter echoing through the halls. I was ready to be a father, ready to step into a role that terrified me and thrilled me at the same time. Then she looked at me with eyes that weren't filled with love anymore, just guilt and something colder. Her lips parted, and the words that spilled out shattered every dream I'd ever built. These twins aren't yours. They're his. I'm going back to him where I belong. In that instant, my entire world collapsed. I stood frozen, staring at her as though she had transformed into a stranger. I'd heard people talk about betrayal before, but nothing could prepare me for the gut punch of hearing it from the woman I thought I would marry. The woman I had put my future in. The woman I thought carried my children. Her voice lingered in my ears like a cruel echo, each word slicing deeper. Not yours, his, back to him, where I belong. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to demand answers, proof, an explanation that would make sense of the madness. But instead, I just stood there, hollowed out, my hands trembling at my sides. And then without knowing why I smiled. Not out of happiness. Not out of acceptance. But out of something darker. Because in that very moment, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: if she wanted to go back to him, I wouldn't stop her. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I wished her luck. And later, when she was gone, I made a few calls. Calls that would set a chain of events into motion. Calls that would guarantee she would regret ever turning her back on me. 2 weeks later, she was on my doorstep, sobbing. But that's getting ahead of myself. To understand the weight of that moment, you need to know the road that led us there. We met in the kind of way people like to romanticize later. I wasn't looking for love when she appeared in my life, but it found me anyway. She had that smile, the kind that makes the air in your lungs feel lighter, the kind that makes you want to believe in forever. I was cautious at first. My life hadn't been free of scars, and trust was something I didn't hand out easily. But she was persistent, and her warmth melted the walls I'd built. We became inseparable. The kind of couple that friends teased for being too close, too perfect. And for a while, it felt like perfection. I remember the day I proposed. I had rehearsed the words 100 times, my heart hammering in my chest as I dropped to one knee. The look on her face, the tears, the laughter, the whispered yes, made every fear dissolve. In that moment, I was certain, she was my forever. When she told me she was pregnant, I was scared, sure, but mostly I was thrilled. The thought of becoming a father filled me with a strange kind of joy, the kind that was bigger than me. 2 heartbeats inside her. 2 futures growing at once. Twins. I'd started painting the nursery, flipping through baby name books, making lists of everything we'd need. She laughed at my enthusiasm, called me adorable when I practiced swaddling on a stuffed bear. I wore my excitement like armor. But behind her eyes, there were shadows I ignored. The way she grew distant sometimes. The way her phone seemed to always be in her hand, screen tilted away from me. The nights she claimed exhaustion and turned to face the wall instead of me. I told myself it was the pregnancy. The hormones. The stress. I told myself love could withstand anything. But I was wrong. That night, when she finally broke the silence, I wasn't expecting it. We had just eaten dinner. I was talking about painting the crib when she set her fork down, hands trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something," she said. The air shifted. My chest tightened. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wasn't good. And then she spoke the words that gutted me. "These twins aren't yours. They're his. I'm going back to him where I belong." I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to process it. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice shaking. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of relief, as though she had been carrying this secret like a stone and finally dropped it. She explained, in clipped, guilty sentences. She had never fully let go of him, her old flame, the man she once swore she hated. They'd reconnected. One thing led to another. And now, she was convinced the children she carried weren't mine. I felt the blood drain from my face. You're telling me this now? I whispered. After everything? After the proposal, the nursery, the names? She flinched, but her resolve didn't waver. I can't live a lie. I love him. I always have. I'm sorry. Sorry. As if that single word could stitch back together the pieces of my heart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand how she could betray me so thoroughly, so cruelly. But instead, something inside me hardened. A strange calm washed over me. Then go, I said, my voice even. If that's where you belong, go. She blinked, surprised at my lack of resistance. Maybe she expected begging. Maybe she wanted me to fight for her. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I simply added, I wish you luck. And with that, she was gone. When the door closed behind her, I collapsed into the couch, staring at the empty space she left behind. The silence was deafening. The plans, the dreams, the future, it all turned to dust in an instant. But beneath the grief, there was something else. Something sharp. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to chase. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. So I picked up my phone. The first call was to a friend who owed me a favor. The second, to someone who knew things about her new man, things I suspected she didn't. The third was to a lawyer, just in case. I didn't need to ruin her life. She was doing a fine job of that herself. But I could make sure she felt the consequences of her choices. And so, while she played house with him, I waited. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, she stood there, makeup smeared, eyes swollen, clutching her stomach as though she was afraid of shattering completely. She was sobbing. Broken. And in that moment, I realized karma doesn't always take years. Sometimes, it only takes 14 days. But what she told me then, was even darker than I imagined. The night she walked out, I thought the silence would crush me. The house felt too big without her voice, too cold without her presence. Every corner whispered memories, her laughter while cooking, her humming while folding laundry, her perfume clinging to the pillows. It was like living in a mausoleum of love that had just died. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch staring at the dark television screen, replaying her words over and over until they lost all meaning. Not yours. His. Where I belong. At dawn, exhaustion pulled me into a restless haze, but even then, her face haunted me. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, as though my subconscious refused to give me peace. That was when the first wave of anger hit. Not the wild, destructive kind that makes you break dishes or punch walls. No, this was colder. A slow, seeping poison that spread through me with every reminder of her betrayal. I had given her everything, me trust, my future, my name, and she had tossed it aside for a man she once swore she hated. I wasn't just mourning the loss of her. I was mourning the loss of who I thought she was. Word spread faster than I expected. It always does. Friends and family began calling, their voices careful, as though I was made of glass. My mother was furious. She wanted me to confront her, to demand answers, to fight for the twins. You can't just let her walk away like that, she shouted over the phone. But I could. And I would. Because chasing her would mean lowering myself to her level. It would mean begging for scraps of love she had already thrown to someone else. No, I wasn't going to do that. My best friend came over with beer and silence. We didn't talk much. He just sat next to me, letting me know I wasn't alone. Every so often, he'd mutter, "She's gonna regret this," and I'd nod, because deep down, I knew he was right. But still, the nights were the hardest. The bed felt like an ocean, and I was drowning in the emptiness. I kept turning, expecting to feel her warmth, only to be met with cold sheets. That's when I started writing in a notebook. Not poetry, not letters to her, but raw fragments of thought, anger, grief, questions with no answers. It wasn't about healing, it was about survival. And every time I wrote, I reminded myself of one thing: she made her choice. People always assume revenge is loud, explosive, fiery, dramatic. But sometimes it's quiet. Mine was quiet. The night she left, after the shock wore off, I picked up my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to a close friend who worked in finance. He had ways of finding things, digging into records. I asked him to keep an eye on her new man, the one she had chosen over me. I didn't need dirt immediately. Just information. The second call was to someone who knew him well, an old acquaintance who had crossed paths with him more than once. I remembered snippets of conversations, rumors about debts, about shady deals, about habits that ruined lives. I asked for confirmation. I wanted to know exactly what kind of man she was running to. The third was to a lawyer. Not because I wanted to sue or claim anything, but because I needed to be prepared. If the twins really weren't mine, then I wanted it in writing. I wanted protection, boundaries, clarity. These calls weren't acts of desperation. They were acts of control. In a world that had just spun out of my hands, I was clawing back a little power. Through whispers, through scraps of information, I learned bits and pieces of her new life. She moved in with him quickly. Too quickly. From the outside, it probably looked like a fairy tale reunion, 2 lovers, reunited against all odds, raising children together. But fairy tales are just illusions painted over cracks. Within days, the cracks began to show. He wasn't the doting partner she expected. The late-night arguments were loud enough for neighbors to hear. Money was tight. He had habits: gambling, drinking, maybe worse that she hadn't noticed or had chosen to ignore. I pictured her sitting on a couch in a shabby apartment, twins still growing inside her, listening to him rage about some trivial thing. I pictured her realizing, too late, that the dream she abandoned me for was actually a nightmare. And a part of me wanted to feel pity. But mostly, I felt vindicated. People kept asking if I'd reached out to her. If I'd tried to win her back. If I'd thought about the twins. The truth was complicated. Did I still love her? In some twisted, residual way, yes. You don't just flip a switch and erase years of love. But love without trust is poison, and I wasn't willing to drink it anymore. Did I wonder about the twins? Of course. A part of me still ached at the thought of holding them, of being a father. But I couldn't raise children who were born into betrayal. Not like this. Did I want her back? No. Not the version of her who left me. So I carried myself with dignity. I went to work. I kept my head down. I rebuilt routines. I let the whispers of gossip roll off me. Because I knew the truth: she had traded stability for chaos, loyalty for lust, love for illusion. And illusions don't last. Still, there were nights when the anger bubbled up. When I replayed everything in my head and questioned where I went wrong. Was I too trusting? Too blind? Too complacent? I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows whispering back every insecurity. I imagined the nursery I'd started painting, the stuffed bear with crooked swaddling clothes, the names scribbled on notepads. Ghosts of a future that would never be. But every time the bitterness threatened to consume me, I forced myself to focus on one truth: I had survived worse. I would survive this. And deep down, I knew the storm she had chosen would eventually swallow her whole. It was my friend, the one watching from the sidelines, who first confirmed it. "She's not happy," he told me over coffee. "He's not who she thought he was. The guy's got debts, man. Serious ones. He's dragging her down with him." I nodded, pretending not to care, but inside, a grim satisfaction spread. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because she needed to see the truth. She needed to understand that loyalty isn't something you can trade like currency. That real love doesn't abandon you for the next shiny thing. And as I listened to the updates, as I heard about the arguments, the financial strain, the disappointment in her eyes, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge. Life was already delivering it for me. And then, it happened. 2 weeks after she left me, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, she stood there, makeup smeared, hair tangled, shoulders slumped like a woman twice her age. She looked nothing like the radiant fiancée I once knew. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her stomach. Her voice was broken, barely a whisper. "I made a mistake." For a moment, I just stared, every emotion colliding inside me: anger, longing, vindication, sorrow. She had chosen him. She had betrayed me. She had destroyed everything we built. And now, here she was, begging for something I wasn't sure I had left to give. I stepped aside, letting her in, but my chest was tight. Because I knew whatever she was about to tell me next would change everything. When she stepped into my house that night, I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't reach for her hand or wipe away her tears. I simply closed the door behind her and stood there, watching, waiting. She sank into the couch like her bones had turned to water, her body trembling, her hands shaking as though she had just escaped a fire. And in a way, maybe she had. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was her sobbing, the kind of sobbing that racks through your chest, ugly and raw, the kind that strips you down to nothing. Finally, she lifted her eyes to me, and in that moment, I saw it: regret. Not the surface-level kind people fake when they're caught in a lie, but the deep, soul-crushing kind that comes when the illusion you sacrificed everything for collapses around you. "I made a mistake," she whispered again. I stayed silent. The words spilled out of her like a dam breaking. He wasn't who she thought he was. The man she had left me for, the man she claimed she always loved, turned out to be a fraud wrapped in charm. At first, it had been intoxicating, she said. Passion, excitement, the rush of forbidden love. But once the dust settled, reality came crashing in. He was controlling. Jealous. Angry. Money slipped through his fingers faster than water, and when it ran out, he turned to darker habits: gambling, drinking, even vanishing for days at a time. She had confronted him once about his behavior. His response wasn't words. It was a fist through the wall inches from her face. Her voice cracked as she admitted that fear had become her constant companion. Fear of his temper. Fear of his addictions. Fear of raising children in a home that felt more like a battlefield. And through it all, he reminded her that she had chosen him. That she had left me behind. That she had burned her bridges. Her tears dripped onto her hands as she finally choked out, "I thought he was my future. But I see now, he's my destruction." I listened, unmoving. Every word was confirmation of what I already suspected. The cracks I'd heard whispers of had widened into gaping chasms, and she was falling through them. She wanted me to say something to console her, to rescue her, to absolve her of the choices she had made. But I couldn't. I had spent 2 weeks living in the ashes of what she destroyed, replaying every moment of betrayal. And now, as she sat there broken, part of me wanted to shout, "Good. You deserve this." But another part of meth part that once loved her so fiercely ached to pull her into my arms and promise her safety. Instead, I chose silence. Because sometimes silence says more than words ever could. As I looked at her, flashes of our past came rushing back. The way she laughed when I proposed. The sparkle in her eyes when she told me about the twins. The warmth of her hand intertwined with mine as we planned our life together. Those memories were knives now, cutting into me with every breath. But alongside them were the darker memories. The way her phone was always turned away from me. The distance in her eyes. The moment she confessed the twins weren't mine. I realized I was standing on a battlefield inside my self-love clashing with betrayal, compassion clashing with fury. And for the first time, I didn't know which side I wanted to win. "I don't know where else to go," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could handle it, but I can't. He's not the man I believed he was. I see now what I gave up. What I threw away." She looked at me then, eyes wide, searching, desperate. "I want to come back." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. She wasn't just asking for forgiveness. She was asking for redemption. She was asking me to rebuild the bridge she had burned to ash. And part of me wanted to laugh. Because coming back wasn't as simple as packing a bag and knocking on my door. Coming back meant undoing a betrayal that could never truly be undone. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, staring at her as if she were a stranger. Because in many ways, she was. The woman I had loved had died the night she chose him over me. The woman sitting on my couch was someone else entirely, someone shaped by regret, fear, and bad decisions. Could I take her back? Could I ever look at her without seeing his shadow? Could I ever hold her without wondering if the twins she carried were a living reminder of her betrayal? The questions swirled, unanswered. And she just sat there, trembling, waiting, praying for me to speak. Finally, I exhaled. "You made your choice," I said, my voice steady. "You walked away from everything we built. You told me I wasn't enough. You chose him. And now, you want to come back?" Her tears fell harder, but she nodded. "I was wrong," she whispered. So wrong. Please, don't turn me away." I closed my eyes, trying to quiet the storm inside me. Part of me wanted to slam the door on her once and for all. To tell her she made her bed, now lie in it. To remind her that love isn't a revolving door she can walk in and out of whenever she pleases. But another part of meth part that still remembered the way her hand fit perfectly in mine called ignore the truth, I still cared. And that was the cruelest betrayal of all. I didn't give her an answer that night. Instead, I told her she could stay on the couch until she figured things out. She thanked me through tears, her voice hoarse from crying. I went upstairs to my room, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the sound of her soft sobs downstairs, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Over the next few days, she lingered in the house like a ghost. She cooked meals she thought I might like. She cleaned as though trying to erase her sins. She spoke softly, cautiously, as though afraid of pushing me too far. But I couldn't shake the image of her in his arms. I couldn't silence the memory of her words, they're his. Not yours. Trust, once broken, doesn't grow back. It stays fractured, no matter how much you try to piece it together. And I wondered if what we once had could ever be rebuilt or if we were doomed to live in the ruins. News trickled in about him, the man she left me for. Word of his debts, his fights, his downfall. He was unraveling fast, dragging everyone around him into the storm. I didn't need to lift a finger. Karma was working faster and sharper than I ever could. And every time I saw her flinch at the sound of her phone buzzing, every time I saw her eyes fill with fear at the mention of his name, I realized something. She wasn't just running back to me. She was running away from him. And that wasn't love. That was desperation. As the days stretched into weeks, the question loomed larger and larger: what do I do with her? Do I open the door to forgiveness, risking another betrayal? Or do I close it forever, choosing dignity over pain? Every glance at her rounded stomach was a reminder of the life growing inside her. A life that might be mine or might not. A life tangled in lies and half-truths. And every night, as I lay in bed listening to her quiet sobs, I felt the weight of the choice pressing down on me. Because whatever I decided would define not just my future but hers. And in the silence of my heart, I knew, the cracks had only just begun to show. The days blurred into one another after she returned. She stayed in my house like a shadow, hovering at the edges of every room. She cooked meals I didn't ask for, cleaned spaces that didn't need cleaning, and tried to make herself useful, as though usefulness could erase betrayal. Every night she cried softly into the couch cushions, thinking I couldn't hear. And every night, I lay awake upstairs, listening. She wanted forgiveness. She wanted restoration. But what she didn't understand was that forgiveness is not a switch you flip, it's a bridge rebuilt brick by brick. And she had set fire to every brick. One morning, she tried to make small talk over breakfast. I was thinking, she began, her voice tentative, maybe we could go shopping together. For the twins. They'll be here before we know it. Her words twisted like a knife in my gut. The twins. Always the twins. The children she swore weren't mine. I set my coffee down, meeting her gaze with a sharpness she wasn't expecting. Why would I shop for children that aren't mine? She flinched, color draining from her face. Tears welled up instantly, but she forced herself to hold my gaze. I don't know for certain, she whispered. I was wrong to say that. I panicked. I thought they were his, but maybe they're not. Maybe they are yours. Her voice trembled with hope, but I wasn't buying it. Maybe, I said coldly, isn't enough. The silence that followed was suffocating. It wasn't long before more pieces of her story emerged. He had been spiraling out of control. Gambling debts. Drinking binges. Nights disappearing with other women. She had confronted him once, demanding honesty. His response had been brutal. You think I want to raise kids that aren't even mine? That sentence shattered her world. The man she had left me for, the man she believed was the father of her twins, had thrown doubt in her face. Doubt that cut deeper than any blade. She had come back to me not only because of his cruelty, but because she no longer knew who to believe. And so the cruel irony unfolded. I didn't know if the twins were mine, and neither did she. The thought gnawed at me every day. Were they mine? Or were they his? The uncertainty was a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every time I looked at her stomach, I felt a mix of longing and revulsion. I wanted to protect them. I wanted to reject them. I wanted answers. One evening, I finally voiced what had been eating at me. We'll get a test when they're born, I said flatly. Her eyes widened, filling with tears. Of course, she whispered. Anything. I hope you'll still be here when that day comes. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I would. For all my anger, for all my cold words, there were moments when I faltered. One night, I came downstairs to find her asleep on the couch, curled up under a thin blanket. Her face was streaked with dried tears, her breathing uneven. She looked fragile, broken, nothing like the strong woman I had once known. And against my better judgment, I felt my chest tighten. I covered her with a thicker blanket, careful not to wake her. Then I stood there for a long time, watching her sleep, hating myself for still caring. Because no matter how much she had hurt me, no matter how deep the betrayal, some part of me couldn't stop loving her. And that part was killing me slowly. It all came to a head one evening when she tried again to bridge the distance. We were sitting in the living room, the silence heavy. Finally, she spoke. I know I hurt you, she said softly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand I was lost. I thought I wanted him, but it was a lie. You're the one who has always been there for me. You're the one I should have chosen. Please, can't we try again?" Her voice cracked, and she reached for my hand. I pulled away. My chest burned with words I had buried for weeks, and I couldn't hold them back anymore. "You shattered me," I snapped. "Do you even understand what you did? I was building a life with you. I was ready to be a father, a husband, everything you said you wanted. And then you looked me in the eye and told me the children I thought were mine belonged to another man. Do you know what that does to someone?" Tears streamed down her face. "I do now. I live with it every day. And I would give anything to take it back." "Too late," I spat. "You don't get to destroy me and then come crawling back when your fantasy falls apart. You don't get to burn the house down and then ask for shelter in the ashes." She collapsed into sobs, clutching her stomach, whispering apologies that sounded like prayers. And I stood there, shaking, torn between the urge to hold her and the urge to throw her out. After she cried herself to sleep that night, I sat alone in the dark, wrestling with my own demons. Part of me wanted to forgive her. To believe her remorse, to rebuild what we had, to raise the twins as if none of this had ever happened. But another part of me knew that was impossible. The wound was too deep. The trust was too broken. And so, for the first time since she returned, I admitted the truth to myself. I couldn't save her. I couldn't save us. The next morning, I told her. "You can stay here until the twins are born," I said, my voice steady but cold. "But after that, we'll know the truth. If they're mine, we'll figure something out. If they're not, you're on your own." Her face crumbled, but she nodded slowly, understanding the weight of my words. It wasn't the forgiveness she wanted. It wasn't the second chance she dreamed of. It was survival. Nothing more. And as she turned away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I realized the collapse wasn't just hers. It was ours. The life we once imagined was gone, buried under lies and betrayal. All that remained was a fragile, fractured shell. And I knew, when the test came, when the truth was finally revealed, everything would either shatter completely or force me to make the hardest choice of my life. The days leading up to the twins' birth were some of the longest of my life. She still lived in my house, but we were like two ghosts drifting past each other. Conversations were short, functional, stripped of warmth. Meals were eaten in silence. Nights were spent in separate rooms, each of us drowning in our own thoughts. Her belly grew heavy, her movements slower. She winced often, the weight of her choices pressing as hard as the weight of the children she carried. I watched, distant yet present, torn between the instinct to care and the resolve to protect my heart. Every time I caught myself softening, I forced myself to remember the night she left. The words that cut deeper than any blade, "They're not yours." Still, a part of me couldn't help but wonder. What if they were mine? What if, despite everything, I was their father? The uncertainty gnawed at me like a parasite. When the day came, I drove her to the hospital. The ride was silent, tense, each of us trapped in thoughts we couldn't speak. Hours later, cries filled the room. Two tiny, fragile lives entered the world, their wails raw and piercing, their little bodies swaddled in blankets. I stood at a distance, watching as nurses bustled around, as she held them close, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment, my heart ached with a longing so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. The sight of them, so small, so innocent, tugged at something primal inside me. But then the doubt returned. Were they mine or his? And so I stayed rooted to the spot, refusing to let myself feel more than I could afford. The paternity test was arranged quickly. A simple swab, a small sample. Science would give us the truth that words never could. She cried when the nurse took the samples, whispering prayers under her breath, clutching the twins as though they might vanish. I said nothing. My silence was my shield. The waiting was agony. Every time I looked at the twins, I felt my heart lurch, wanting to claim them, fearing to love them. I kept my distance, unwilling to bond with children who might not be mine. She, on the other hand, hovered constantly. Every glance at me was filled with desperation, as though she believed my answer would matter more than the test. The envelope arrived a week later. My hands shook as I opened it, the paper heavy with the weight of my future. I read the words once, twice, 3 times, just to be sure. The twins were not mine. A hollow silence filled me. No anger. No tears. Just emptiness. I set the paper down and looked at her. She already knew from my face. Her body crumpled, sobs tearing out of her throat as she clutched the twins tighter. "I'm sorry," she whispered, over and over, as if the word could undo the truth printed in black and white. But it couldn't. Nothing could. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the test results still on the table. She was upstairs, rocking the twins, her sobs echoing faintly through the walls. I thought about everything we had been through. The love, the laughter, the betrayal, the collapse. I thought about the twins' innocent lives born into chaos, unknowing victims of choices they didn't make. And I thought about myself. The man who had been shattered, rebuilt, and scarred by love that wasn't real. Finally, I stood, walked upstairs, and found her sitting in the rocking chair, tears staining her cheeks as she held the sleeping twins. "They're not mine," I said quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. "You can't stay here," I continued. "This house, this life, it's not yours anymore. You chose him. And now, you live with that choice." Her face crumpled again, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. The next morning, I helped her pack. Not out of love, but out of necessity. She moved slowly, broken by exhaustion and grief. The twins cried, their tiny voices echoing like ghosts. At the door, she turned to me one last time. "I'll never stop regretting this," she whispered. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I destroyed it." I said nothing. There were no words left. She walked away, twins in her arms, shoulders heavy with the weight of the life she had lost. And just like that, she was gone. The silence that followed was different from the silence after she first left. This time, it wasn't suffocating. It was cleansing. I realized then that love, once poisoned by betrayal, can never be pure again. You can forgive, maybe, but you can never forget. She had taught me the cruelest lesson of all, that loyalty is not guaranteed, that love is not enough, that trust is the most fragile currency we have. And as I stood in the empty house, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I beg for someone to stay. Never again would I build my future on shifting sand. Never again would I let love blind me to the truth. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. I repainted the nursery not for children who weren't mine, but to erase the ghosts of dreams that no longer belonged to me. I returned to my routines, my friendships, my work. Piece by piece, I stitched myself back together. The scar would always remain, but scars are proof of survival. And I had survived. Looking back, I see the arc of it all, the hope, the betrayal, the collapse, the resolution. She thought she was leaving me for something better. She thought the grass was greener. But all she found was poison. And when she came crawling back, broken and afraid, I realized something vital. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in holding on. It's in letting go. So if you ask me what I learned, I'll tell you this. Love is nothing without loyalty. Trust, once broken, can never be whole again. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say to someone who betrayed you is not "I hate you" or "I forgive you." It's simply, "Goodbye."